I never imagined that a perfectly choreographed wedding would become the stage for my daughter's bravest moment and the scene of a family's most devastating public meltdown. It happened at my ex-husband's sister's extravagant ceremony, beneath crystal chandeliers and surrounded by 300 impeccably dressed guests who witnessed my 12-year-old daughter stand up and change everything. What started as an unwanted obligation transformed into a moment of raw truth that exposed the elaborate lies holding together two powerful families. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Olivia, and for the past 5 years, I've been the family disappointment, the one who walked away from their golden boy, the one who refused to stay silent about the cracks beneath the perfect surface. My daughter Lily has inherited my stubborn honesty, but with a courage that still takes my breath away. The Harrington family has always operated like minor royalty in our small coastal town. Their historic shipping business supports half the local economy, and their name adorns buildings from the hospital wing to the community center. When I married their youngest son, James, I was welcomed as a promising addition, right until the moment I discovered the family's carefully guarded secrets and refused to play along. Our divorce rocked the community, not because divorce was unusual, but because no one leaves a Harrington. The stories they circulated painted me as unstable, gold-digging, unfit. I weathered the storm for Lily's sake, building a new life as a freelance photographer while fighting for shared custody against their army of attorneys. James remarried within 18 months to someone more suitable, a senator's daughter with the right pedigree and compliant disposition. Meanwhile, his sister Victoria, the family darling, had finally found her perfect match in Alexander Whitney, heir to a rival's shipping fortune. Their wedding wasn't just a union of two people, but a business merger dressed in white lace and family tradition. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing, addressed to both. Lily and me. I nearly tossed it, assuming it was some cruel joke, until I saw Victoria's handwritten note. Lily should see what a proper family celebration looks like. Don't embarrass us. Those words burned in my hands. My first instinct was to decline, to protect Lily from their judgment and cold shoulders. But something stopped me. Perhaps the knowledge that shielding her from difficult realities wouldn't prepare her for the world, or maybe just stubborn pride. They wanted us invisible. I refused to disappear. Lily was surprisingly excited. At 12, she understood more than I sometimes gave her credit for, but she still held affection for her Aunt Victoria, who had occasionally shown her genuine kindness when no other Harringtons would. "We should go, Mom," she insisted, her eyes bright with determination. "I want to see Aunt Victoria get married." What I didn't know then, what none of us could have predicted, was that Victoria's perfect day would unravel thread by thread because of what Lily would discover and the courage she would find to speak the truth, no matter the consequences. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. I scoured my closet for something appropriate that wouldn't drain my budget, settling on a simple navy dress that conveyed respect without trying to compete with the Harrington crowd. For Lily, we found a pale blue dress with silver threading that made her eyes shine and complemented her dark curls. She twirled in front of the mirror, momentarily just a 12-year-old excited about dressing up, before her expression grew, serious beyond her years. "Mom," she said, studying her reflection, "why do they hate us so much?" The question caught me off guard, though I should have expected it. I sat beside her on the bed, choosing my words carefully. "They don't hate us, Lily. They hate what I represent." I challenged their carefully constructed image of perfection when I left James and spoke the truth about some things they'd rather keep hidden. "Like what?" she pressed, as she often did when I tried to shield her from the uglier details. I sighed, knowing she deserved some version of the truth. Like the fact that your father had problems with gambling that he hid from everyone. Like the business dealings that weren't always above board. Like the way they treat people who work for them. I stopped short of mentioning James's affairs or the night I'd found him intoxicated and violent. Some truths could wait until she was older. Lily nodded thoughtfully. So they're fake. They're protective of their reputation, I corrected, though her assessment wasn't wrong. They believe image matters more than anything, more than honesty, more than kindness sometimes. She was quiet for a long moment, studying her reflection again. I'd rather be real than perfect, she finally said, and my heart swelled with a fierce pride. Me too, sweetheart, I whispered, pulling her close. Me too. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect late spring, day that seemed designed for expensive ceremonies. As we drove to the Harrington estate, a sprawling oceanfront property that had been in the family for 4 generations, my stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. Behind the imposing iron gates lay the scene of both my happiest and most painful memories. The gardens where James had proposed, the rooms where I'd later discovered his betrayals, the pristine facades hiding so many cracks. Lily squeezed my hand as the car crunched over the gravel driveway. "We've got this, Mom," she said with such conviction that I almost believed her. When did my daughter become so strong? When did she start reassuring me instead of the other way around? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The estate had been transformed into a wedding fantasy, white tents billowing in the sea breeze, thousands of roses and peonies cascading from archways, paths lined with flickering lanterns though it was still daylight. Uniformed staff directed early arrivals toward the ceremony space, where white chairs faced an elaborate floral arch with the ocean as backdrop. We'd barely stepped from the car when Eleanor Harrington, family matriarch and my former mother-in-law, intercepted us. At 68, she remained formidable, elegantly styled silver hair, posture that would shame a ballerina, and eyes that could freeze you mid-step. Today, she wore dove-gray silk and pearls the size of small marbles. Her smile, tight and practiced. "Olivia," she said, her tone suggesting she was addressing something unpleasant found on her shoe. "How unexpected to see you actually came." "Hello, Eleanor," I replied evenly. The invitation specifically requested Lily's presence. I wouldn't deny her the chance to see her Aunt Mary. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Lily, softening fractionally before hardening again. "Yes, well, the ceremony begins at 4. Perhaps you could find seats toward the back. Victoria has arranged the seating very particularly." Before I could respond, Lily stepped forward, extending her hand with perfect poise. "Thank you for hosting us, grandmother. Your home looks beautiful today." The formal address, which Lily never used in private, and the impeccable manners momentarily disarmed Eleanor. She looked almost startled as she automatically took Lily's hand. "Yes. Well, thank you, Lillian. You've grown since I last saw you." "It's been 14 months, Lily replied, her voice containing just enough pointed accuracy to make Eleanor flinch slightly. My daughter, the human calendar, never forgot a slight or an absence. "Yes, well, schedules are demanding these days," Eleanor murmured before straightening, her momentary discomfort replaced with practiced authority. "The family is gathering in the East Parlor. James is there with Rebecca and the children. Perhaps you should—" "We'll find our way to the ceremony," I interjected smoothly. "Thank you for your concern." Eleanor's lips thinned, but she merely nodded and glided away, stopping occasionally to direct staff or greet early guests with considerably more warmth than she'd shown us. Lily looked up at me, her expression caught between amusement and determination. "Round 1 complete?" I laughed despite myself. Let's pace ourselves. Long day ahead. We wandered toward the ceremony space, strategically avoiding the east parlor where James and his new family would be holding court. I had no interest in watching him play the devoted father now when he'd missed 3 of Lily's last 5 school events. Lily, for her part, maintained a civil relationship with her father, but harbored a clear-eyed assessment of his shortcomings that sometimes startled me with its maturity. The wedding coordinator, a harried young woman with a tablet and an earpiece, intercepted us near the rose garden. "Olivia and Lillian?" she confirmed, checking something off her list. "You're in row 23, seats 1 and 2. I didn't miss the significance. Nearly the last row, far from family, practically in another zip code from the wedding party. Exactly where Eleanor wanted us, present but invisible. "Perfect," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Thank you." As we walked toward our designated seats, I noticed Lily scanning the grounds with unusual intensity. "Looking for someone?" I asked casually. She shrugged. "Just getting the layout." Something about her tone struck me as odd, but before I could question her further, a commotion near the main house caught our attention. Alexander Whitney, the groom, emerged surrounded by groomsmen, in matching gray suits, all laughing boisterously. Alexander was undeniably handsome, tall with the kind of confident bearing that came from generations of privilege, his dark hair artfully styled, his smile practiced and camera-ready. I'd met him only twice before at family functions, finding him charming in that superficial way of men who are used to getting exactly what they want. Victoria seemed besotted with him, though I'd always sensed something calculated in their relationship, a perfect partnership on paper that lacked the messiness of genuine passion. Lily stood very still, watching Alexander and his friends with an unreadable expression. "What do you know about him?" she asked quietly. "Not much," I admitted. "He comes from money, old shipping fortune like the Harringtons, Harvard business, school, active in the right charities. Victoria met him at some regatta fundraiser last year." Lily continued watching, her eyes narrowing slightly as Alexander clapped one of his groomsmen on the back, their laughter carrying across the lawn. "He seems practiced," she finally said, echoing my own unvoiced thoughts with such precision that I glanced at her in surprise. "How do you mean?" She hesitated, choosing her words with unusual care. "Like he knows exactly what face to wear in public." The observation was startlingly astute, and something in her tone made the hair on my arms rise. Before I could probe further, more guests began arriving in earnest, a parade of designer dresses, summer suits, air kisses, and practiced compliments. We made our way to our assigned seats, as instructed, in the far back row. From this distance, we had a panoramic view of the entire setup, the flower-draped archway where Alexander now stood with the officiant, the string quartet playing softly to one side, the gathering crowd of guests representing the upper echelon of coastal society. I recognized state senators, tech executives, old money families whose names graced buildings and boardrooms. The Harringtons sat in the front row, naturally, Eleanor resplendent in gray silk, Richard Harrington looking uncomfortable in his tuxedo as always, preferring the functionality of the shipping offices to social occasions. James and his new wife Rebecca sat nearby, their 2-year-old twins mercifully being supervised by a nanny a few rows back. I felt a momentary pang at the sight of them. Not jealousy exactly, but awareness of the parallel life I might have lived had I been willing to compromise my principles and ignore the red flags. Lily sat quietly beside me, her back straight, her expression composed but alert. She seemed to be watching everything, absorbing details with an intensity that seemed unusual even for her observant nature. When I asked if she was okay, she simply nodded, squeezing my hand briefly. "Just watching," she said softly. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 4 precisely, The Harringtons operated with military punctuality. But at 10 minutes past, a subtle tension began rippling through the assembled guests. The string quartet tactfully repeated their repertoire. The officiant checked his watch with increasing frequency. Alexander maintained his confident smile, but I noticed him checking his phone at one point, his expression momentarily darkening, before he tucked it away. At 4:20, Eleanor rose from her seat and disappeared toward the house, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. The crowd began to murmur, a collective wondering about the delay. Delayed brides weren't uncommon, but Victoria Harrington was known for her punctuality almost as much as her perfectionism. "Something's wrong," Lily whispered, leaning close to me. "Look at Alexander's friends." I followed her gaze to the groomsmen, noting the way they shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that suggested they knew something the rest of us didn't. One, a tall man with a military bearing whom I vaguely recalled was the best man, kept checking his watch and grimacing. By 4:30, the murmurs had grown louder. Richard Harrington now stood at the back of the aisle, deep in conversation with someone I didn't recognize. James had disappeared, presumably sent to investigate the delay. The perfect day was developing hairline fractures before our eyes. I leaned toward Lily. "What do you think is happening?" She met my eyes, and I was startled by the certainty in her expression. "She found out," she said simply. "Found out what?" I asked, confused. Before Lily could answer, a collective gasp rose from the crowd as Victoria suddenly appeared at the end of the aisle, not in her wedding gown, but in what appeared to be a silk robe, her carefully styled hair now disheveled, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, as 300 guests stared in shocked silence. Alexander took a half-step forward, his expression a complex mixture of concern and something harder, colder. "Victoria!" he called, his voice carrying across the space. "What are you doing? Go get dressed." The command in his tone sent a chill through me, reminiscent of how James had spoken to me near the end of our marriage, that mixture of public solicitude and private control. Victoria didn't move, her gaze fixed on Alexander with such naked pain that several guests looked away, embarrassed by the raw emotion on display at what should have been a perfectly choreographed event. "Tell them," she said, her voice breaking. "Tell them what you really think of me. Tell them about Meredith." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Alexander's confident facade faltered briefly, a flash of cold fury crossing his features before he composed himself. "You're upset, darling," he said smoothly. "Wedding jitters. Let's get you inside and—" "No!" Victoria's voice strengthened, years of Harrington authority asserting itself even through her evident distress. "No more lies. I found the texts, Alexander. I know everything." The crowd's murmuring intensified. Eleanor had reappeared and now stood frozen halfway down the aisle, horror etched on her features as her perfectly planned event imploded before her eyes. Richard Harrington moved with surprising speed for a man his age, positioning himself protectively near his daughter. Alexander looked around, suddenly aware of his audience, a calculation visible behind his eyes. He adopted an expression of patient concern. "Victoria is feeling overwhelmed," he announced to the crowd. "The wedding will be delayed while we—" "There won't be a wedding," Victoria interrupted, her voice stronger now. "It's over." The collective gasp from the guests was audible. Alexander's carefully cultivated expression slipped again, revealing something ugly beneath. His gaze swept, the crowd looking for an ally, a diversion, anything to regain control of the situation. And somehow, impossibly, his eyes found Lily and me in the back row. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by a cruel calculation that made my blood run cold. He gestured toward us with a dismissive wave. "This is what happens when you invite toxic influences to a family event," he announced loudly. "Victoria was fine until she heard that her brother's ex-wife was here. filling her head with feminist divorce propaganda. Isn't that right, Olivia? The collective attention of 300 guests swiveled toward us. I felt Lily tense beside me, her hand finding mine and squeezing hard. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd as people tried to connect the dots between my presence and Victoria's meltdown. I sat frozen, blindsided by the attack and the sudden spotlight. Alexander had neatly shifted blame, redirecting the narrative with a practiced ease that revealed volumes about his character. And it was working. I could see people nodding, whispering, making connections that weren't there. Eleanor stepped forward, leveraging decades of social authority. Perhaps it would be best if you left, Olivia. This is a family matter. The dismissal stung, but not as much as the injustice. I hadn't exchanged a single word with Victoria today. Whatever had happened between her and Alexander had nothing to do with me. But the Harringtons had always needed scapegoats, someone to blame when perfection cracked. I began to stand, dignity my only remaining option, when Lily suddenly rose, beside me. Before I could stop her, she stepped into the aisle, her pale blue dress luminous in the afternoon sun, her voice clear and carrying across the now silent gathering. "That's not what happened," she said, her voice unwavering despite 300 pairs of eyes turning toward her. "I know what really happened. I know the truth about Alexander." Time seemed to freeze as my 12-year-old daughter stood alone, in the aisle, facing down the collective weight of 300 stunned wedding guests. All eyes shifted from Victoria's tear-streaked face to Lily's small but determined figure. The Harringtons had always been masters of controlling narratives, of burying uncomfortable truths beneath polished exteriors. But they had never faced someone like Lily, someone too young to understand that some truths weren't meant to be spoken, especially not at a six-figure wedding with the governor in attendance. I half rose from my seat, caught between maternal instinct to protect her and the realization that something significant was unfolding. Alexander's handsome face had transformed, his practiced charm replaced by something cold and calculating, as he assessed the unexpected threat from a 12-year-old girl. "Well, isn't this charming?" he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Victoria's little niece wants to play detective. Perhaps someone should take the child outside while the adults sort this out." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the gathering, clearly expecting someone, anyone, to remove this inconvenient disruption. But no one moved. The raw emotion of Victoria's appearance had already shattered the careful choreography of the day, leaving guests frozen between voyeuristic fascination and social discomfort. Lily took another step forward, her chin lifted in that stubborn angle I recognized from 1,000 small battles over bedtimes and homework. "I was exploring the house earlier," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I wasn't snooping. I was looking for Aunt Victoria to give her the card I made." I heard voices from the library, Alexander's voice. Alexander's expression hardened further. "Young lady, this is hardly the time or place for—" "You were with your best man," Lily continued, undeterred, the tall one with the red tie. She pointed toward the groomsman I'd noticed earlier, whose face now drained of color. "You were laughing. You said Victoria was just a business arrangement, that once the merger was complete, you'd have control of both shipping companies. You said she was—" She hesitated, clearly editing something inappropriate. "Not very smart for trusting you. You said there were loopholes in the prenup that your lawyer found." A deadly silence fell over the gathering. Alexander's confident facade cracked momentarily, genuine shock flashing across his features before he rallied. "This is absurd," he laughed, though the sound held no humor. "The imaginative ramblings of a child who clearly spends too much time watching soap operas. Victoria, darling, surely you don't believe—" "There's more," Lily interrupted, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "You talked about someone named Meredith. You said once the merger was complete, you and she could stop sneaking around. You showed pictures on your phone. You said—" Again that brief hesitation. that Meredith understood what marriages like this were really about: business and appearances, not love. The best man took an involuntary step backward, confirming everything without saying a word. Victoria made a small, broken sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Every head turned back to Alexander, waiting for his response to these devastating accusations coming from the most unexpected source. Alexander's composure slipped completely, revealing the rage beneath the polished exterior. "This is outrageous," he snapped, all pretense of charm abandoned. "Richard, control your family. This brat is clearly disturbed. Like mother, like daughter, I suppose." His gaze swung toward me, venom in his eyes. "We all know where she gets it from. The same woman who couldn't handle being a Harrington, who spread vicious lies about James when she failed as a wife. Now she's using her child to sabotage Victoria's happiness because she's bitter and jealous." The attack was calculated to shift focus, to reframe the narrative around my supposedly toxic influence, rather than his exposed duplicity. It was the same playbook the Harringtons had used against me during the divorce: discredit, dismiss, distract. I recognized the technique, but that didn't lessen its sting. I rose fully then, moving to stand beside Lily. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. "My daughter doesn't lie," I said simply, placing my hand on her shoulder. "She has no reason to invent stories about conversations she overheard. What possible motivation would she have?" Eleanor stepped forward, decades of social authority radiating from her rigid posture. "Revenge, obviously," she said coldly. "You've poisoned her against this family for years, Olivia. We all know how bitter you've been since the divorce. Using your own child as a weapon. It's despicable even for you." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding in agreement, others looking increasingly uncomfortable with the public spectacle unfolding before them. Victoria remained frozen in place, her gaze moving between Alexander and Lily, as if trying to determine which version of reality to trust. "That's not true," Lily said, her voice smaller now, but still clear. "Mom never says bad things about any of you. Even when you don't send birthday cards or cancel visits, even when Dad missed my school play to go to Aspen with his new family. She always says you're just doing your best." The simple truth of this statement hung in the air, more damning in its way than any accusation. I had worked hard to shield Lily from my own complicated feelings about the Harringtons, to allow her to form her own relationships with her father's family without the burden of my experiences. Victoria suddenly moved, walking slowly down the aisle toward us. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path between the bride who would not be and the niece who had spoken the unspeakable. When she reached us, Victoria knelt carefully, bringing herself to Lily's eye level. "Tell me again what you heard exactly," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Not the summary, the exact words." Lily took a deep breath, glancing briefly at me for reassurance. I nodded slightly, though my heart raced with the knowledge that whatever she said next would permanently alter the course of many lives, including our own. He said, "Once we're married, the merger is locked in. Her father can't back out, and my attorneys found 3 separate loopholes in the prenup. Within 2 years, I'll control both companies, and there won't be a thing the Harringtons can do about it." Lily's recall was precise, her voice shifting slightly as she quoted Alexander directly. "Then the other man, him." She pointed to the best man who seemed to be contemplating a rapid exit. "Asked about you finding out." And Alexander said, "Victoria sees what she wants to see. She's so desperate to prove to Daddy that she can advance the family business that she's blind to everything else." Victoria flinched at these words but nodded for Lily to continue. "Then they talked about Meredith." Alexander said, "Meredith understands how this works. She gets that marriages like this are strategic, not romantic. Once things settle down." After the wedding, we can be more open about our arrangement. Lily hesitated. He showed pictures on his phone. The other man said they were inappropriate for someone about to get married. Alexander laughed and said something about having his cake and eating it too. Victoria's face had gone very still, a calm settling over her features that seemed more concerning than her earlier distress. She stood slowly, smoothing her silk robe with deliberate care, then turned to face Alexander. "Is it true?" she asked. Simply. Alexander had recovered some of his composure during Lily's recitation, assembling his features into a mask of wounded dignity. "Of course not," he scoffed. "This is absurd. Why are we allowing a child's misunderstood eavesdropping to derail our wedding? Victoria, darling, you're emotional. Let's take this conversation somewhere private and answer the question." Richard Harrington's deep voice cut through Alexander's deflection. The family patriarch had moved to stand beside his daughter, his typically reserved demeanor replaced by something harder, colder. "Is it true?" The shift in power was palpable. Alexander's gaze darted between father and daughter, calculation evident behind his eyes. "Richard," he tried, adopting a more reasonable tone, "surely you understand that business discussions can sound callous when taken out of context. Of course, I have the company's best interests at heart, our company's best interests. That's what this union has always been about, hasn't it? Strengthening both our families' positions in the market?" It was the wrong approach. Victoria's expression hardened further, and Richard's face flushed with anger. "My daughter is not a business acquisition," Richard said, each word precise and cutting. "And while I may be old-fashioned about many things, I don't consider marriage a mere corporate merger." Alexander's confident smile faltered. He tried another tack, turning to Victoria with practiced sincerity. "Victoria, you know I love you. This child clearly misunderstood a joke between old friends. You can't possibly believe—" "Show me your phone," Victoria interrupted, extending her hand. The request hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. 300 guests held their collective breath. Alexander's face went through a rapid series of calculations. "This is ridiculous," he said, forced laughter not quite masking his growing panic. "I'm not going to dignify this interrogation by, if there's nothing to hide, why not show her?" The question came from an unexpected source, James, my ex-husband, who had moved to stand near his father. His expression was unreadable, but something in his posture suggested a man recognizing a situation all too familiar. Alexander's composure cracked further. "I don't have to stand here and be accused based on a child's fabrications. This entire situation is beneath dignity." He turned toward his groomsmen. "Let's go. Clearly, the Harringtons have chosen to humiliate themselves today." He took 2 steps before Victoria's voice stopped him, stronger now and carrying the unmistakable Harrington authority. "Is her name saved as Meredith or something else in your contacts?" Alexander froze mid-step. The question was too specific, too knowing. I realized suddenly that Victoria had already found evidence. Lily's overheard conversation had simply confirmed what she suspected. "Who is Meredith Chapman?" Victoria continued, her voice steady despite the pain evident in her eyes. "Because when I found the text on your phone this morning while you were in the shower, that's the name attached to messages no engaged man should be sending to another woman. That's the name attached to the account that's been making regular transfers into your personal account, the one you didn't think I knew about." Gasps rippled through the gathering. This was no longer just a child's overheard conversation, but concrete evidence of deception. Alexander turned slowly, his handsome face now ugly with thwarted rage. "You went through my phone?" he demanded, as if her violation of his privacy was the real crime here. "You had no right." "She had every right." Eleanor Harrington's crisp voice cut through his protest. The family matriarch moved to stand beside her daughter, presenting a united front that I had never seen before. Victoria is a Harrington. We protect our own, from threats outside and within. The irony of this statement wasn't lost on me, given how little protection I'd received when I was part of their family, but I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't about me or my history with the Harringtons. This was about Victoria facing her own moment of terrible clarity, recognizing that the man she planned to marry was not who he pretended to be. Alexander looked around, suddenly aware that the tide had turned irrevocably against him. His groomsmen had distanced themselves, physically and metaphorically, from the implosion occurring at the altar. The wedding guests watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as the carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "Fine," he snapped, abandoning all pretense of civility. "You want the truth? Yes. Meredith and I have an understanding. An understanding that marriage is about practical advantages, not this romantic fantasy you're all so invested in. The Harringtons aren't the only ones who know how to leverage connections for business purposes." The brutal honesty of this statement seemed to shock even him, as if he hadn't intended to confirm everything so explicitly. Victoria flinched as though he'd slapped her, but remained standing, her gaze never leaving his face. "The Chapman shipping portfolio," Richard Harrington said slowly, understanding dawning. "Meredith Chapman, Stuart Chapman's daughter. You were planning to use our merger as leverage to acquire their Eastern Seaboard operations as well." Alexander's silence was confirmation enough. The business strategy was now painfully clear: marry into the Harrington family, use their assets and connections to engineer a takeover of the Chapman operations, creating a shipping monopoly that would benefit him primarily while using both families as stepping stones. Victoria's composed expression cracked slightly, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "And I made it so easy for you," she whispered. "So desperate to prove myself to the family, to show I could contribute something beyond planning the perfect charity gala. You knew exactly which buttons to push." The raw pain in her voice stirred something unexpected in me, not satisfaction at seeing a Harrington brought low but genuine empathy. Despite our differences, despite the way she had sometimes treated me, Victoria was experiencing the same devastating realization I had faced years earlier: that the person she trusted had seen her primarily as a means to an end. Alexander's expression hardened as he recognized his position was untenable. "You Harringtons," he said, contempt dripping from each word. "So convinced of your own superiority, your family legacy. You're dinosaurs in this market. Within 5 years, half your fleet will be obsolete. I was offering you a lifeline, Victoria, not the other way around." The insult to the family business, the Harrington pride and joy for 4 generations, was the final straw. Richard stepped forward, his typically reserved demeanor replaced by cold fury. "I think you should leave, Alexander," he said quietly. "Now." Alexander looked around once more, assessing and discarding potential strategies in real time. Finally, he straightened his shoulders, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate precision. "Gladly," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This farce has wasted enough of my time." He turned to leave, then paused, directing one final barb toward Victoria. "You know what the saddest part is? You're not even surprised. Deep down, you never believed anyone could actually want you for yourself. That's why this was so easy." The cruelty of this parting shot hung in the air as he strode down the aisle, brushing past guests without acknowledgement. His groomsmen followed after a moment's hesitation, leaving the wedding party decimated at the altar. An uncomfortable silence descended, 300 guests witnessing a family's private pain with nowhere to look and nothing appropriate to say. The perfect Harrington image, maintained through decades of careful curation, lay in tatters before them. Victoria stood very still, caught between her family's support and her public humiliation. Then, in a moment that would later be described as either breakdown or breakthrough, she began to laugh, softly at first, then with increasing hysteria, the sound cutting through the awkward silence like broken glass. "The perfect Harrington wedding," she gasped between laughs that bordered on sobs. "Always about appearances, isn't it, Mother? Always about the right match, the right connections. Never about whether someone might actually make me happy." Eleanor stiffened at this public challenge to family philosophy. "Victoria, perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." "Why?" Victoria interrupted, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Haven't we spent enough time hiding the truth? Packaging everything in acceptable narratives?" Alexander was right about one thing. This family is obsessed with image over substance. She gestured toward the assembled guests. "Everyone here knows it. They play the same games." The raw honesty was startling coming from Victoria, who had always been the most devoted adherent to Harrington protocols. Eleanor's face reflected genuine alarm at this unprecedented deviation from the script. Victoria turned suddenly, her gaze finding Lily and me still standing in the aisle. "Thank you," she said simply. "Both of you." The acknowledgement, spoken publicly before the cream of coastal society, represented a seismic shift in family dynamics. Eleanor looked like she might faint. Richard appeared thoughtful. James studiously examined his shoes, perhaps recognizing uncomfortable parallels to his own situation. Victoria addressed the stunned gathering. "There will be no wedding today." "Obviously. Please enjoy the reception if you wish. The food and champagne are already paid for. Consider it a celebration of dodging a bullet rather than a marriage." With that extraordinary statement, she turned and walked back down the aisle, head high despite her disheveled appearance and tear-streaked makeup. The crowd parted for her, no one quite brave enough to offer either congratulations or condolences for what had transpired. As the crowd erupted into barely hushed conversations, Eleanor approached us, her expression complex. For once, the family matriarch seemed at a loss for words. "Your daughter," she finally said, each word clearly difficult, "has done this family a service today." It wasn't quite gratitude, certainly not an apology for years of coldness, but coming from Eleanor Harrington, it was seismic. I placed my hand protectively on Lily's shoulder. She told the truth, that's all. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Lily, reassessing her in light of what had transpired. "Where did you learn to be so forthright, Lillian?" Lily met her grandmother's eyes without flinching. "From Mom," she said simply. "She always says that truth matters more than being comfortable." Something flickered across Eleanor's features. Not quite recognition, certainly not approval, but perhaps a grudging reassessment. With a slight nod, she turned to follow her daughter, social damage control. Clearly the priority now. The wedding guests had begun to disperse, some heading toward the promised reception for the uniquely voyeuristic opportunity to discuss what they'd witnessed over free champagne, others discreetly making exits to share the gossip elsewhere. Within minutes, the carefully arranged white chairs held only scattered occupants, the picture-perfect ceremony space now just an elaborate backdrop to a drama no one had anticipated. Lily let out a long breath, the tension she'd been holding suddenly released. "Are you mad at me?" she asked quietly, looking up with uncertainty in her eyes. I knelt beside her, taking both her hands in mine. "Mad? Lily. No. What you did was incredibly brave. It was also complicated and will have consequences. But no, I'm not mad at you." "I couldn't let him lie about you," she said, her voice small but determined. "And I couldn't let Aunt Victoria marry someone who was just using her. It wasn't right." The simple moral clarity of a 12-year-old, unencumbered by social complexities or fear of consequences. When had I lost that? When had compromise and accommodation become my default settings? You did the right thing, I assured her. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, telling the truth matters. She nodded, some of the tension leaving her small shoulders. Can we go now? Everyone's staring. She wasn't wrong. Despite their pretense of discreet conversations, many guests were watching us with undisguised curiosity. We had transformed. In a matter of minutes, from unwanted obligations to be seated in the back row to central figures in a scandal that would fuel gossip for months to come. Absolutely, I agreed, standing and taking her hand. I think we've had enough Harrington hospitality for one day. We had barely taken 3 steps when James intercepted us, his expression uncharacteristically serious. He glanced at Lily, then at me. Olivia, he said, his voice low. What happened? Today? He hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. It was necessary. James's words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to unpack. After years of gaslighting and dismissal, this small acknowledgement that truth had value, even when inconvenient, felt monumental. I searched his face for the familiar signs of manipulation, but found only complicated regret. We should go, I said simply, neither accepting nor rejecting his olive branch. Some reconciliations required more than a moment of clarity during someone else's crisis. He nodded, stepping aside but addressing Lily before we passed. What you did took courage, he told her, awkwardness evident in his posture. The Harrington way would have been to discover the truth, then bury it to save face. You chose a different path. Lily studied her father with that disconcerting clarity that made adults squirm. Would you have told the truth if you had heard what I heard? The direct question caught him off guard. James had always excelled at evading accountability, at reframing narratives to position himself favorably. Now he faced his daughter's uncompromising moral standard. He hesitated, and in that pause, I saw him consider and discard several convenient lies. No, he finally admitted. I would have told Victoria privately, then helped the family, develop a face-saving story. Some diplomatic illness, perhaps, to explain canceling the wedding. The Harrington reputation would have been preserved, but at the cost of honesty. The admission seemed to surprise even him, a moment of self-awareness I hadn't witnessed during our marriage. Lily nodded, accepting his answer without judgment. I'm glad I'm not just a Harrington then, she said simply. I'm Mom's daughter too. The statement contained no malice, just a clear-eyed assessment of her dual heritage. The Harrington, legacy of power and appearances balanced by what she had learned from me about integrity and resilience. James flinched slightly, but didn't contradict her. Yes, he said quietly. You are. He looked at me then, something like genuine respect in his eyes. Take care, Olivia. We left him standing there amid the abandoned ceremony, a man suddenly conscious of fault lines in the foundation he'd never questioned. As we made our way across the manicured lawn toward the parking area, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes following us. The woman who had dared leave a Harrington and the child, who had dismantled a social event years in the planning, with nothing but truth as her weapon. The car felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of the past hour, its familiar interior offering privacy from the scrutiny we'd endured. Lily sank into the passenger seat with a long exhale, suddenly looking very much her age after her remarkable display of courage. That was the most exhausting thing I've ever done, she declared, leaning her head back against the seat. Is this what growing up is like? Knowing things you wish you didn't and having to decide whether to say them? The question caught me off guard with its insight. I started the engine before answering, buying time to find the right words. Sometimes, I admitted as we pulled away from the Harrington estate. Growing up means recognizing that truth is rarely simple and almost never convenient, but it doesn't mean you stop valuing it or speaking it. She considered this, watching the elaborate iron gates recede in the side mirror. "I didn't plan to say anything," she confessed. "When I overheard them this morning, I was just going to tell you privately. But then Alexander tried to blame you, and everyone was looking at us like we were the problem, and I just—" She made an explosive gesture with her hands. "Couldn't keep it in anymore." "Righteous anger can be clarifying," I said, thinking of my own journey. Sometimes it cuts through all the social calculations and fear of consequences, and you simply do what's right because the alternative becomes unbearable. She nodded thoughtfully. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I was more scared of what would happen if I stayed quiet. Aunt Victoria would have married him. He would have hurt her and the company. And everyone would have kept treating you like you were the one who did something wrong when all you ever did was tell the truth about Dad." My heart constricted at her assessment. I had tried so hard to shield her from the uglier aspects of my divorce, to allow her to form her own relationship with her father without the burden of my grievances. But children see more than we realize, understand more than we credit them for. "Life is rarely as black and white as we'd like it to be," I said carefully. "Your father—" I paused, choosing my words with care. "Made choices that hurt our family. But that doesn't make him a villain in every story. People are complicated. Lily, they can be wrong in some ways and right in others. Like Aunt Victoria," she observed. "She was always nice to me, even though she was mean to you sometimes." "Exactly," I agreed, impressed by her nuanced understanding. "People contain multitudes. The trick is recognizing that complexity without using it as an excuse for harmful behavior." As we turned onto the coastal highway leading home, Lily rolled down her window, letting the salt air rush in. After the stifling atmosphere of Harrington expectations, it felt like breathing for the first time in hours. "Do you think Aunt Victoria will be okay?" she asked after a while, genuine concern in her voice. I considered the question seriously. "I think she's been handed a painful gift," I finally said. "The truth hurts right now, but it saved her from something much worse. A lifetime bound to someone who saw her as nothing more than a business transaction. What she does with that gift is up to her." "Like you," Lily said quietly. "When you left Dad." The parallel hadn't escaped me. Despite our differences, Victoria and I had both faced the devastating realization that the foundations of our relationships were built on deception. The difference was that Victoria's moment of clarity had come before legal entanglements, before years of accumulated compromise and disillusionment. "Similar," I acknowledged, "though your father's issues were different from Alexander's. Less calculated, perhaps, more about personal demons than strategic manipulation. But yes, I also had to decide whether stability and social standing were worth sacrificing my self-respect and integrity." "You chose right," Lily said with absolute conviction, even though it was hard. The simple validation from my daughter meant more than 1,000 social approvals. In my darkest moments during the divorce, when the Harringtons' influence had threatened my custody rights and financial security, I had questioned whether my principles were worth the cost. Hearing Lily's assessment, untainted by adult compromise, felt like absolution. "Thank you," I said softly. "That means more than you know." We drove in companionable silence for a while, both processing the events of the day. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, casting long golden light across the coastal landscape. After the high drama of the thwarted wedding, there was something profoundly grounding about the simple act of driving home with my daughter beside me. My phone began buzzing with notifications, the Harrington drama evidently hitting the social media grapevine. I ignored it, unwilling to engage with the spectacle our lives had momentarily become. Whatever narratives were being constructed around today's events, they could wait. "Mom?" Lily's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Do you think people will be mad at me? At school and stuff? Madeline Harrington is in my grade, and she's Dad's cousin's daughter. The question reminded me that for all her remarkable poise today, Lily was still a 12-year-old navigating complex social waters. The Harrington influence extended throughout our community, from school boards to business associations, and social fallout was inevitable. Some people might be, I acknowledged honestly. The Harringtons have a lot of connections, and some families align themselves with power out of habit or self-interest. But others will respect what you did, even if they don't say so publicly. She nodded, absorbing this reality. I'd do it again, she declared after a moment's reflection. Even if everyone gets mad. That, I told her with fierce pride, is true courage, not fearlessness, but choosing to do what's right even when it's terrifying. As we neared our neighborhood, modest compared to the Harrington estate but comfortable and genuinely ours, Lily surprised me with another question. Do you think I'll ever get invited to another Harrington event? I glanced at her, trying to gauge whether the question reflected regret. Possibly not for a while, I admitted, though I suspect Victoria might see things differently now. Why? Would you want to be? She considered this seriously. Maybe. Not for the fancy stuff or to impress anyone, but they're still family, right? Even when they're wrong or make bad choices? The maturity of her outlook humbled me. Where I had experienced justified anger toward the Harringtons' treatment of us, Lily saw the possibility of connection despite flaws, the essence of true compassion. Yes, I agreed. They're still family. Complicated, frequently infuriating family, but connected to you nonetheless. Finding the balance between maintaining those connections and protecting your own integrity. That's the work of a lifetime. She seemed satisfied with this response, turning to watch as we pulled into our driveway. Our home, a renovated craftsman with a wildflower garden I'd planted myself, couldn't compete with Harrington grandeur, but it held something more valuable, authentic peace. I'm starving, Lily announced as we walked toward the front door, the wedding drama apparently giving way to more immediate 12-year-old concerns. We never got any of that fancy wedding food. I laughed, grateful for her resilience and ability to transition from family crisis to basic needs without missing a beat. Pizza night? I suggested, unlocking the door. With extra cheese, she agreed enthusiastically. I think exposing corrupt grooms works up an appetite. Inside, I kicked off my uncomfortable heels while Lily disappeared to change out of her blue dress. The transition from high-stakes family drama to ordinary Saturday evening felt surreal but welcome. I ordered pizza, then checked my phone to find 17 missed calls and dozens of messages, some from friends concerned about what they'd heard, others from journalists hoping for comments on what was rapidly becoming a society scandal. I silenced the phone, unwilling to feed the drama machine tonight. Tomorrow would be soon enough to manage the aftermath. Tonight was for celebrating Lily's courage and processing the day's revelations. When Lily reappeared in comfortable pajamas, hair pulled back in a messy bun, I felt a surge of gratitude for this remarkable person I was privileged to raise. She flopped onto the couch beside me, reaching for the remote with the casual entitlement of a child in her sanctuary. Movie night? She suggested, scrolling through options as if we hadn't just upended one of the most prominent families in the region. Something with superheroes or magic, not romance. I've had enough wedding drama for one day. I laughed, appreciating her ability to compartmentalize. Absolutely. You choose. As she deliberated between film franchises, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 5 years ago, leaving James had felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness, sacrificing security and status for the nebulous promise of authenticity. The Harringtons had leveraged every advantage to punish what they saw as betrayal, from legal delays to social isolation. Yet somehow, against considerable odds, We had built something precious in the aftermath. A relationship with my daughter based on mutual respect and unwavering honesty. Today had revealed the strength of that foundation in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The doorbell rang, announcing the pizza's arrival. Ordinary life reasserting itself after extraordinary events. As we settled in with our comfort food and chosen film, I marveled at how the human spirit recalibrates, moving from crisis to normalcy, from public drama to private contentment. My phone buzzed again from its ignored position on the counter. This time, I glanced at the notification and felt my breath catch. A text from Victoria. "Thank Lily for me. Some truths hurt but heal. Would like to talk when dust settles. Different perspective now." I showed the message to Lily, who read it with solemn consideration before brightening. "See? I told you she was one of the good ones, even if she forgets sometimes." "You see the best in people?" I observed, not for the first time amazed by her capacity for compassion without naivety. "It's a gift, as long as you don't let it blind you to red flags." "Like you did with Dad?" she asked, the question straightforward, rather than accusatory. "Yes," I admitted. "I saw what I wanted to see for too long. But eventually, I found the courage to see clearly and act on that knowledge." She nodded, processing this. "Today at the wedding, when Alexander tried to blame you and everyone looked at us like we were the problem, it felt really familiar. Like I've watched people do that to you my whole life." The observation hit with the force of revelation. Of course, Lily had noticed the subtle and not-so-subtle ways the Harrington circle had marginalized and blamed me over the years. Children absorb patterns even when we think we're shielding them. I struggled to find words that acknowledged her insight without burdening her with adult complexities. "That's very perceptive." "It made me mad," she continued, picking at her pizza crust. "Not just today, but all the times. When people acted like you were the problem for telling the truth or standing up for yourself. For standing up for me." The simple validation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For years, I had weathered the Harrington narrative that painted me as difficult, unstable, the architect of my own exclusion. Having my daughter recognize the injustice of that framing felt like a weightlifting I hadn't known I carried. "Thank you for seeing that," I said softly. "It matters." She shrugged, embarrassed by the emotional turn. "It's just obvious. You're the strongest person I know. Not because you never get scared or sad, but because you do the right thing anyway." In that moment, I understood something fundamental about parenting. Our children learn not from our perfect moments, but from watching us navigate our imperfect ones with integrity. Lily hadn't developed her moral compass despite witnessing my struggles with the Harringtons. She had developed it because of seeing how I faced those challenges. "I learned from you too," I told her, meaning it completely. "Your clarity today, your willingness to speak truth regardless of consequences, that's a courage adults often lose along the way, buried under layers of social calculation and fear." She rolled her eyes at the sentiment, 12 years old again, rather than the poised truth-teller who had stood alone in a wedding aisle. "Can we watch the movie now, before the pizza gets cold?" I laughed, recognizing her deflection for the emotional self-protection it was. "Absolutely. Hit play." As superheroes filled the screen, battling villains with improbable powers and clear moral stakes, I reflected on the real heroism I had witnessed today, not in grand gestures or physical prowess, but in a child's unwavering commitment to truth, even when every social pressure demanded silence. The Harringtons had always equated power with wealth, connection, and control, but today had revealed a different kind of power. The quiet strength that comes from living authentically, from choosing integrity over convenience. It wasn't a power that announced itself with family crests or inherited privilege. It lived in moments of choice, in the courage to speak when silence would be easier, Hours later, with Lily asleep on the couch beside me, I checked my phone again to find the expected avalanche of reactions to the day's events. The society pages were already running with sanitized versions of the wedding disaster. Harrington. Corporate PR had issued a statement announcing the mutual decision to cancel the merger with Whitney Shipping due to irreconcilable business differences. Through the corporate speak and social niceties, though, threads of the actual truth were emerging. Several messages from acquaintances expressed quiet support, suggesting the Harringtons' influence wasn't as monolithic as they preferred to believe. A particularly surprising text came from Rebecca, James's new wife, simply saying, "Your daughter is remarkable. Not sure I would have had her courage at twice her age." These small affirmations confirmed what I had learned painfully over 5 years of rebuilding. Truth, while often unwelcome in the moment, creates its own gravity over time. People recognize authenticity, even when social pressures make acknowledging it difficult. Looking at Lily's peaceful, sleeping face, I felt a fierce pride unlike anything I had experienced before. We had walked into the Harrington stronghold as unwanted obligations, seated in the back row and expected to remain invisible. We had left having fundamentally altered the family's trajectory, not through malice or vengeance, but through the simple, revolutionary act of speaking truth. Whatever came next, the inevitable social fallout, the realigned family dynamics, the community whispers, we would face it together, grounded in the understanding that had guided us through today. That integrity, while rarely the easiest path, was always the one worth taking. I gently woke Lily to move her to bed, guiding her half-asleep form down the hallway. As I tucked her in, she murmured sleepily, "Do you think we changed anything today? Really changed it?" I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think you reminded an entire family that appearances aren't the same as strength," I said softly. "That's no small thing." She nodded, eyes already closing again. "Good," she murmured. "They needed reminding." As I turned out her light, I reflected on the extraordinary wisdom contained in that simple assessment. The Harringtons had indeed needed reminding, as perhaps we all do sometimes, that real strength isn't found in maintaining flawless facades, but in the courage to see and speak truth, even when it shatters the image we've carefully constructed. In that sense, Lily's stand at the wedding wasn't just an isolated act of courage. It was an invitation to a different way of being, one where authenticity trumped appearance, where integrity outweighed influence. An invitation the Harringtons might not immediately accept, but one that would remain open, challenging their fundamental assumptions about what constituted power and strength. Morning arrived with deceptive normalcy, sunlight filtering through curtains, the distant call of seabirds, the familiar rhythm of our weekend routine temporarily obscuring the extraordinary events of the previous day. For a few peaceful moments as I made coffee in the quiet kitchen, yesterday's wedding drama felt dreamlike, more allegory than actual experience. Then my phone chimed with a news alert. Harrington-Whitney wedding canceled amid dramatic allegations. Reality reasserted itself with stark clarity. The article was carefully worded, mentioning irreconcilable differences and revelations about conflicting business interests, rather than explicit details about Alexander's duplicity or Lily's intervention. The Harrington PR machine had clearly been working overtime to contain the narrative. Still, reading between the carefully constructed lines, the essential truth remained. A truth my 12-year-old daughter had forced into the open when entire social ecosystem was invested in keeping it hidden. I silenced my phone again, unwilling to let outside voices intrude on our Sunday sanctuary. Today wasn't for managing fallout or navigating social consequences. Today was for honoring the courage it had taken to stand alone in that aisle and speak truth to power. Lily emerged from her bedroom around 9, hair tousled from sleep, eyes still heavy-lidded. She shuffled to the kitchen island and climbed onto a stool, accepting the hot chocolate I placed before her with a murmured thanks. "How are you feeling this morning?" I asked, studying her face for signs of distress or regret. She considered the question seriously, hands wrapped around her mug. "Weird," she finally decided. Like I did something both totally wrong and totally right at the same time. The paradox she described resonated deeply. How often had I felt that same dissonance after standing my ground with the Harringtons? The conviction of right action, coupled with the social discomfort of violating powerful expectations. "That feeling has a name," I told her. "Moral courage. It's what happens when doing the right thing requires breaking social rules that everyone around you takes for granted." She nodded slowly, absorbing this framework. Like when Rosa Parks wouldn't move to the back of the bus. We learned about her in school. Similar principle, though on a much more important historical scale, I agreed, touched by her search for context. Standing up to injustice often means making people uncomfortable, especially people who benefit from the status quo. "The Harringtons definitely benefit from the status quo," she observed wryly, with a perception that continually surprised me. Everyone always agreeing with them, never questioning anything they do. That kind of deference becomes its own trap, I said, pouring myself more coffee. When no one ever challenges you, you lose the ability to recognize your own mistakes. You start believing your own mythology. Lily was quiet for a moment, stirring her hot chocolate thoughtfully. "Do you think Victoria will be okay?" She asked for the second time since yesterday, revealing where her true concerns lay. Not with social fallout or Harrington anger, but with the human impact of the truth she had revealed. "I think Victoria has been given an opportunity," I said, carefully. "Painful, yes, but also potentially transformative. Sometimes our most difficult moments create space for growth that wouldn't have been possible otherwise." Lily seemed to consider this deeply. "Like you, after you left Dad?" The parallel wasn't lost on me. My own journey away from the Harrington orbit had indeed been both devastating and liberating, a crucible that burned away comfortable illusions but forged something stronger in their place. "Yes," I acknowledged. "Leaving your father in the security of that life was terrifying. I questioned myself constantly. But that very difficulty forced me to rediscover parts of myself I had compromised away. My creativity, my independence, my voice." "And then you started your photography business," Lily added, completing the narrative she had witnessed unfold over years. "And now people pay you to take pictures that tell true stories, not fake perfect ones." The simple summary of my professional evolution made me smile. After years working in corporate marketing, creating the very kind of polished, aspirational imagery that the Harringtons valued, my post-divorce career had indeed evolved toward documentary photography that celebrated authentic moments, rather than constructed perfection. The symmetry wasn't accidental. "Finding your authentic voice takes time," I told her. "Victoria may need space to figure out who she is, apart from family expectations and social performance. But she's been given the gift of truth, however painful. What she builds with that gift is up to her." Our peaceful morning sanctuary was interrupted by the doorbell, an unusual occurrence for early Sunday. Exchanging curious glances with Lily, I went to answer it, finding an elegantly dressed courier holding a small cream envelope. "Delivery for Lillian Harrington," he announced formally, using Lily's legal surname in a way that instantly identified the sender. I accepted the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Thank you." Back in the kitchen, I handed the envelope to Lily. "It seems you have correspondence from the Harrington estate." She took it with visible trepidation, turning the heavy cardstock over in her hands before carefully breaking the seal. Inside was a handwritten note on Victoria's personal stationery, not the formal Harrington letterhead used for official family communications. Lily read it silently, her expression shifting from apprehension to surprise. After a moment, she handed it to me, wordlessly inviting me to share its contents. Victoria's elegant script filled the small card. Dear Lily, thank you for your courage. Yesterday, while others saw what they wished to see, you spoke what you actually witnessed. The difference matters more than I can express. When the truth is painful, the messenger often bears the burden of others' discomfort. I want you to know that I am grateful, not angry. You gave me clarity when I most needed it, though I didn't know to ask for it. Perhaps we are more alike than circumstances have allowed us to discover. When you're ready, I would welcome the chance to know my niece better, not as a Harrington obligation, but as the remarkable young woman you are becoming. With sincere gratitude, Aunt Victoria. I reread the note twice, struck by its authenticity and lack of pretense. This wasn't the Victoria I had known during my marriage, the perfect Harrington daughter who excelled at maintaining appearances and family mythology. This was someone new emerging from yesterday's crucible, someone capable of genuine reflection. What do you think? Lily asked, watching my face carefully. I handed the note back, honoring her privacy while acknowledging the significance of Victoria's overture. I think it's remarkably honest, I said. And I think it suggests Victoria may be more resilient and more authentic than the Harrington facade has allowed her to show. Lily traced her finger over the signature, considering, should I write back? That's entirely your decision, I told her, careful to separate my complicated history with the Harringtons from her opportunity to form her own relationships. What feels right to you? She thought for a long moment. I think I want to. Not right away, but soon. She seemed different yesterday. After everything happened. Like she was seeing things clearly for the first time. The insight demonstrated a compassion that humbled me. Where I might have seen the Harringtons primarily through the lens of past hurts, Lily could recognize the possibility of growth and change, the humanity beneath the polished exterior. That's very perceptive, I acknowledged. Sometimes people need a shock to break through patterns they've accepted their whole lives. Yesterday may have been that moment for Victoria. Lily carefully returned the note to its envelope, placing it on the counter with a decisive nod. I'll write back tomorrow. Today is still our day. Her protection of our Sunday sanctuary touched me deeply. Despite the Harrington name she carried legally, Lily had developed a clear understanding of boundaries, of when to engage with that complex legacy, and when to prioritize the life we had built together. What shall we do with our day, then? I asked, grateful for her wisdom. She brightened immediately. Can we go to the tide pools? Low tide is at 11:30. Marine biology had become her passion over the past year, each coastal excursion revealing new wonders in the microscopic ecosystems revealed when the ocean retreated. Perfect, I agreed, relieved by the prospect of salt, air and open horizons after yesterday's claustrophobic social dynamics. Let's pack a picnic. 90 minutes later, we navigated the rocky shoreline of our favorite cove, the wedding drama temporarily forgotten as Lily excitedly identified sea stars, anemones, and hermit crabs in their temporary pools. I watched her crouch to examine a particularly vivid purple urchin, her face alight with genuine curiosity, and felt a profound gratitude for this child who could move so fluidly between moral courage and simple joy. "Mom, look!" she called, pointing to a small octopus that had emerged from beneath a rocky ledge. "He's changing colors!" I joined her at the edge of the pool, watching as the creature shifted from mottled brown to vibrant red, its remarkable, adaptive capabilities on full display. "Amazing," I murmured, struck by nature's reminder that transformation was always possible, that no being was confined to a single state or color by past patterns. Lily watched, entranced, as the octopus navigated its temporary domain. "They can fit through any space larger than their beak," she informed me, drawing on her extensive marine knowledge. They change shape completely because they have no fixed skeleton. A useful skill, I observed, being able to adapt to new circumstances to change your shape when necessary. She glanced up, catching the metaphor with her usual quickness. Like people can if they're brave enough. Exactly like that, I agreed, thinking of Victoria's note and what it suggested about her own potential for transformation. People get trapped in their own rigid structures sometimes. Expectations, reputations, family traditions. But those aren't actually fixed like bones. They're more like social agreements we can renegotiate if we're courageous enough. She considered this, watching the octopus continue its color-shifting exploration. The Harringtons have a lot of rigid structures, she observed. All those rules about how to act and what to say and who matters. They do, I acknowledged. 4 generations of wealth and influence create powerful patterns. But even the strongest patterns can change when someone is brave enough to question them. Like you did, she said, and like I did yesterday. Like we both did, I corrected gently, each in our own way, each at our own time. As the tide began its inevitable return, we relocated to higher ground, spreading our picnic blanket on a flat rock warmed by the midday sun. The simple lunch, sandwiches, fruit, cookies I'd baked yesterday morning in another lifetime before the wedding, tasted extraordinary in the open air, with the rhythm of waves providing a soothing backdrop to our conversation. Lily lay back, on the blanket after eating, staring up at the vast blue expanse above us. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" she asked suddenly. "With Dad and the Harringtons, I mean. That they had been, I don't know, more normal?" The question revealed the contemplative space she had entered, connecting yesterday's drama to the larger patterns of our family history. I lay back beside her, considering my answer carefully. "I used to," I admitted. "Especially in the beginning, when the divorce was fresh and the Harringtons were using every advantage to make things difficult for us. I would lie awake imagining alternate realities where your father had been different, where his family had valued authenticity over appearance, where we could have built something genuine together. Cloud shadows drifted across us, temporary, patterns of light and darkness on our small sanctuary." "But not anymore?" Lily prompted. "Not anymore," I confirmed. "Because I've come to understand that those very challenges forced me to become stronger, clearer, more authentically myself. Without them, I might have continued compromising away essential parts of who I am without even realizing what I was losing." She turned her head to study my profile. "Like what parts?" "My creativity, for one," I said, thinking of how my photography had evolved after leaving the constraints of Harrington expectations. My voice, my moral compass. The Harrington world rewards conformity and social performance. Navigating it successfully requires 1,000 small compromises that accumulate over time until you barely recognize yourself. "That's sad," Lily said softly. "To lose yourself like that." "It is," I agreed. "But it's also incredibly common. We all make compromises to belong, to feel secure, to avoid conflict. The question isn't whether we'll face that pressure, but how we respond when we recognize what's happening." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this adult complexity with her usual thoughtfulness. "I'm glad you found your way back," she finally said. "To yourself, I mean." The simple statement contained such profound understanding that it momentarily took my breath away. "Thank you," I said softly. "I'm still finding my way. It's a lifetime journey, not a destination." "Is that why your pictures changed?" she asked, making connections I hadn't realized she had observed. "Before, when you worked for that marketing company, all your photos were super perfect. Beautiful people with perfect hair and clothes, looking like nothing bad ever happened to them. Now you take pictures of real people doing real things. even when they're messy or complicated. Her assessment of my professional evolution was startlingly accurate. After establishing my independent photography business post-divorce, I had gradually shifted from commercial work toward documentary projects, capturing authentic human moments rather than curated perfection. That's remarkably perceptive, I told her, genuinely impressed. Yes, my approach to photography changed as I reclaimed my own authentic voice. I became less interested in creating illusions and more committed to capturing truth. Beautiful. Not because it's flawless, but because it's real. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. We lay in companionable silence for a while, watching clouds transform overhead, each shape temporary, fluid, evolving into the next without resistance. "Mom?" Lily's voice broke the peaceful quiet. "Do you think Victoria will change like you did? Find her real self again?" The question revealed where her thoughts had wandered during our silence, back to her aunt and the potential for transformation yesterday's painful truth might have catalyzed. "I hope so," I said honestly. Her note suggests she might be ready. To question patterns she's accepted her whole life. That's a powerful beginning. But real change requires sustained courage and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths about yourself and your family. Not everyone is prepared for that journey. "I think she might be," Lily said with surprising conviction. She seemed different after everything happened, like something broke open inside her. The image was apt, a breaking open that makes new growth possible, painful but potentially transformative. "Sometimes that's exactly what we need," I agreed. "A crack in the structures we've built around ourselves to let the light in." As afternoon advanced toward evening, we reluctantly gathered our picnic and headed home, the day's simple pleasures having created a buffer between us and yesterday's intensity. The coastal air had worked its magic, clearing mental cobwebs and providing perspective that indoor contemplation rarely matched. Back home, I found several missed calls from James, uncharacteristic for a Sunday when Lily wasn't scheduled to be with him. After Lily disappeared to shower off the salt and sand, I returned his call with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Olivia," he answered immediately, an unusual urgency in his voice. "I've been trying to reach you." "We were at the beach," I explained, neutral but not unfriendly. "What's happening?" He sighed heavily, the sound of a man carrying unaccustomed weight. "Everything is in flux. The family is in crisis mode. Victoria has apparently decided this is her moment to question every Harrington tradition and business practice simultaneously. She spent the morning reviewing company policies on everything from parental leave to environmental impact. Father is beside himself. The image of Victoria channeling yesterday's revelation into sweeping reassessment made me smile despite myself. "Good for her," I said simply. "That's one perspective," James acknowledged, surprising me with his lack of reflexive defense. Mother, predictably, has taken to her bed with acute distress. The official story is that Victoria discovered Alexander's unsuitability just in time, thanks to thorough family vetting procedures. I couldn't suppress a short laugh at this revision of history. And how does that version account for Lily's rather public role? "It doesn't," he admitted, though Victoria has made it abundantly clear to anyone who will listen that Lily saved her from a disastrous marriage and possibly saved the family business from a hostile takeover. She's been remarkably vocal about her gratitude. The information confirmed what Victoria's note had suggested, that yesterday had indeed catalyzed something authentic in her, something strong enough to resist the Harrington impulse toward face-saving narratives. "I'm glad to hear that," I said simply. James was quiet for a moment. "I also wanted to tell you," he continued, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "that I've been thinking about what Lily said yesterday, about how I would have handled the situation differently, about being more than just a Harrington." I waited, allowing him space to find his way through unfamiliar emotional territory. She was right, he finally said. I would have chosen family reputation over uncomfortable truth. I've always chosen that, including during our marriage. And I'm beginning to see that it's cost me, more than I realized. The admission, perhaps the most honest communication we had shared in years, caught me off guard. Not because it revealed anything I hadn't known, but because it suggested James himself was finally recognizing patterns he had previously defended as natural and necessary. That's significant self-awareness, I acknowledged, careful not to overstate the moment while still honoring its potential importance. Victoria's situation has been clarifying, he said wryly. Watching the family rally around a sanitized version of events rather than acknowledging the reality we all witnessed. It suddenly seemed absurd in a way I couldn't ignore. And Lily's courage made our collective cowardice impossible to overlook. I thought of our 12-year-old daughter, standing alone in that wedding aisle, speaking truth that an entire social system was invested in keeping hidden. She has remarkable moral clarity, I agreed, something many adults lose along the way. Including me, James acknowledged with painful honesty. I've spent so long justifying Harrington methods that I stopped questioning whether they were right. Watching Lily yesterday, it was like seeing a version of myself that never existed, someone who valued truth over convenience and approval. The self-reflection was so unexpected, so contrary to the defensive posture he had maintained throughout our divorce and co-parenting journey, that I found myself momentarily speechless. She gets that from you, he continued into my silence. That courage to stand alone if necessary, to speak truth regardless of consequences. I've resented it at times, if I'm honest. It would be more convenient if you both were more pliable. But yesterday made me wonder what I've sacrificed by choosing convenience over clarity all these years. The admission contained no request for absolution, no expectation of praise for this belated recognition, just a simple acknowledgement of patterns he was beginning, perhaps, to question. In its unassuming honesty, it represented the most genuine connection we had shared in years. Self-awareness is always the first step toward change, I offered, neither dismissing his reflection nor overstating its significance. What matters is what you build with that awareness going forward. Yes, he agreed quietly. That's the harder part, isn't it? As our conversation ended, I felt a curious lightness. Not reconciliation or closure exactly, but the subtle shift that occurs when old patterns yield to new possibilities. Whatever journey James was beginning, whatever reassessment Victoria was undertaking, yesterday's moment of raw truth had created openings where none existed before. Lily emerged from her shower, wrapped in her favorite oversized towel, hair dripping onto the hardwood floor despite my frequent reminders about bathroom mats. "Who was on the phone?" she asked, casual curiosity rather than concern in her voice. "Your father," I said. "Apparently, your Aunt Victoria is challenging quite a few Harrington traditions today. She seems to be reevaluating everything from business practices to family priorities." Lily's face brightened with genuine pleasure. "Really? That's good, right?" "I think so," I agreed. "Real change takes time, but questioning what you've always accepted as inevitable, that's a powerful beginning." She nodded, satisfied with this assessment. "Sometimes you have to break things to fix them," she observed, with that startling wisdom that periodically emerged from her 12-year-old perspective. Like when you reset a bone that's healing wrong. The metaphor was surprisingly apt, a painful intervention necessary to prevent permanent dysfunction. Exactly like that, I agreed. Some patterns, left unchallenged, create lasting damage. We spent the evening in quiet companionship, both still processing the weekend's seismic events in our own ways. As I tucked Lily into bed, a ritual she claimed to have outgrown but still secretly welcomed, She asked one final question that revealed where her thoughts had settled. Do you think I'll ever be invited to another Harrington wedding? The query contained no anxiety, just genuine curiosity about future family dynamics. I considered it seriously. I think you might, I said. Though perhaps not for a while. And certainly not one arranged primarily for business advantages or social climbing. Victoria's experience may change how the next generation of Harringtons approach marriage altogether. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this assessment. Good, she said simply. Because next time, I want to sit in the front row, not all the way in the back where no one can see us. The statement contained no bitterness, just a clear-eyed recognition of past dynamics and expectations for something different going forward. In its simplicity, it reflected everything I hoped to instill in her. Not anger about past injustices, but conviction that future interactions could and should be different. Front row it is, I agreed, kissing her forehead. Or nowhere at all. As I turned out her light and closed her door, I reflected on the extraordinary weekend we had navigated together. A journey from unwanted obligations seated in the back, row to catalysts for transformation that no one could ignore. Whatever the Harringtons might say publicly about yesterday's events, whatever narrative they might construct to maintain their carefully curated image, the essential truth remained. A 12-year-old girl had stood alone in a wedding aisle and changed the course of a powerful family's trajectory with nothing but honesty as her weapon. In a world that often rewarded polished performance over authentic expression, that celebrated power over principle, Lily had demonstrated a different kind of strength, the quiet courage to speak truth even when every social pressure demanded silence. As I had told her at the beach, moral courage often meant making people uncomfortable, especially those who benefited from the status quo. Yesterday, uncomfortable truth had shattered a wedding and exposed the fault lines in a family mythology, built over generations. Today, that same truth was creating space for new possibilities. For Victoria's reevaluation, for James's tentative self-awareness, for Lily's growing confidence in her own voice. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and opportunities, its own moments of choice between comfortable facades and uncomfortable authenticity. But whatever came next, we would face it grounded in the understanding that had guided us through this weekend. That integrity, while rarely the easiest path, was always the one worth taking. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.